I just wanted to, again, thank Georgia State University, Andrew Young School of Public Policy, Dean Wallace, and introduce, I'm just going to go ahead and let Mr. Ambassador Young, who needs no introduction, to dive right in and get his perspective on these issues in terms of the changing nature of the economy, what it means for the black community in Atlanta. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you. You know, I came to Atlanta to work in the civil rights movement. And basically, we were trying to integrate the economy and the politics of the South. By the time we got around to integration and made it the law of the land toward the late 60s, I ended up running for Congress and then ending up going to the UN and finally drafted to be mayor. In fact, I didn't want to do any of those things, but nobody else wanted to do them. And but let me start with mayor because that's where the challenge started. We were a city of about just getting close to 1 billion. And we had solved the problems better than any other city in the South, mainly because the business community decided that it was going to invest in a city too busy to hate. They realized that if they wanted to grow, they had to be different from Birmingham or New Orleans or any other cities of the North and South. And so we started out with a cooperative movement. In the middle 60s, there were about 12 black businessmen who were CEOs and 12 white CEOs that used to get together one Saturday morning a month from 9 to 12 with no agenda and no press. I don't think anybody even took minutes, but they would just meet together and talk about the city. And they basically headed off a lot of the problems. One I remember particularly when in the 60s, 66, other cities were rioting and there was conflict. This group, your grandfather was one of the co-chairs, Herman Russell. And they decided they needed summer jobs. And so they got on the phone, and in 1 week, they created 6,000 summer jobs for young black people. So the kids who would have been walking the streets or hanging out suddenly had to put on a shirt and tie and go to work as an intern. And the way they did it was the bank presidents got on and called their suppliers and said, we need you to take so many interns. And black businesses took interns. And the thing that did for the city, it took a brain trust of smart kids at the high school level and introduced them to business. One of those, my wife's godchild, is now running, I think he's the vice president of Coca-Cola in Kansas. And almost all of these young people who got startup jobs in the 60s are still with those companies or some other companies doing well. And they expand the model of success of all the companies. Carl Ware, for instance, who was a young graduate of Carnegie Mellon and Clark Atlanta University, was sent to Africa. And he devised a unique solution to the apartheid question. instead of withdrawing support of Coca-Cola, he sold the Coca-Cola bottling company to a group of black brothers who ran the South African breweries. And it was a perfect match for both of them. And they didn't take the money out. They transferred the money through Bishop Desmond Tutu's foundation to care for some of the orphans of the war and of the emerging AIDS crisis. I'm saying that, and now Coca-Cola the present generation of Coca-Cola doesn't even know how it happened. But Coca-Cola practically runs, well, it's the only American company that you can find in just about every country in Africa, and it's doing well. But if it hadn't been for the integrated thinking that came out of this city, it wouldn't have happened. I'm right now trying to figure out how we're going to awaken this generation of business people to begin to build bridges, because we succeeded because we looked at problems as opportunities rather than difficulties. And the fact that the Chinese are moving into Africa big time is an opportunity. But we're not prepared for it. But I've been trying to get some technology companies to begin to move into the African continent, because the world population is now about 7 billion. By the turn of the century, it's going to be about 9 billion. And the fastest growing part of that world population is going to be on the African continent. And so that if you're going to be in business in the 22nd century, you're going to have to be in business in Africa. Now, that's exactly what I told Europeans when I became mayor. When I went to Germany, Atlanta didn't see itself. Delta told me that we're a regional airline with a few national routes, and that's what we intend to stay. I said, well, you can stay that way, but Atlanta's got to be an international city to survive. And so I brought in, and of course, they commissioned a feasibility study by some of these, well, let me just say what I called them. Smart-ass white boys with Ivy League degrees. And they said we didn't need an international terminal, and we couldn't afford it. And I said, okay, that's your opinion. But we went on and got Swiss Air, Japan Air, Lufthansa, and KLM. Now, they were not just airlines that were looking for a place to land. They were airlines from countries that had a surplus of capital that were looking to grow. And so I went not only to the airlines, but to the companies and said, look, if you're going to be in business in the 21st century, you've got to be in Atlanta, because you can get to the U.S. market in 2 hours from the Atlanta airport, 80% of the U.S. market. And so if you want to be in business, Atlanta's the best place to locate your business. 1,100 companies bought that. And we attracted $70 billion in global capital into the city in the 80s when I was mayor. And then we brought the Olympics on top of that. But I'm saying that what the experts were saying was provincial. And Dr. King used to say there's lies, damn lies and statistics. And so everything we did, we were told was impossible. It was impossible to desegregate Birmingham. It took us about 6 months. It was impossible to get Voting Rights Act. It took us 3 months. And so when I became mayor, and I didn't want to be mayor, but I believe in providence, spirituality, whatever you want to call it. I think that you have to look at this world not as a physical reality, but as a spiritual reality. You can read about that comfortably with almost any of Deepak Chopra's work. I didn't get it from Deepak Chopra, I got it from Gandhi, who got it from Jesus. But I couldn't understand Jesus until I read Gandhi. And Gandhi took Jesus and politicized it and got India free and began to make a design, a system of change without violence. And it's buying into that system that has perpetuated and propelled Atlanta and the South as much as it's going. Now, where are we now? I just finished reading a couple of months ago the fourth industrial revolution, and I learned about something called blockchain, which I'd never heard of. And so I got a little pamphlet called Blockchain Everything, and I learned a little more, but I'm not into that, and that's probably going to be relevant, for the next generation. But the things that we are doing sort of come out of the experience of conflict. I picked up a little book just before I got elected mayor, Cities and the Wealth of Nations, and by Jane Jacobs. And it's still worth reading because she documents the fact that nations do not create economies and wealth. Cities do. And the reason cities create wealth is because cities have problems. And in solving the city's problems, they usually come up with solutions that other cities need or that other persons want to share. And so I don't look for the research centers of the world, though I don't discount them. But I look at the problems of the cities as the solution to the future. I made a speech at Jackson Penitentiary in Michigan, and I wasn't prepared. I went to meet the warden, and he said, "Would you speak to some of our guys?" And I said, "Sure," thinking it would be a nice little group of, sophisticated criminals. And instead, he led me into a gymnasium with about 1,000, mostly young black men, black, brown, and a few white. I didn't see criminals, but I didn't know what to talk about. And I had just left South Africa, and I reminded them that the young people in South Africa call their prison experience Nelson Mandela University. They don't say that they were in Robben Island Penitentiary. And they viewed that 10 years that they spent in jail as the time that prepared them to take over the country. They celebrated their prison experience. That was because of the leadership of Nelson Mandela. But I was challenging them. I said nobody would have ever paid any attention to Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham if it had been written from his desk at Ebenezer Church. But a letter written from the Birmingham jail, written around the margins of the New York Times, and then when he ran out of space in the New York Times, thank goodness there was good, tough toilet paper, and he wrote it on toilet paper. Well, it helped to change the South. So people who are in jail and people who are victims are people who live with problems. And to me, they are more likely to invent and develop solutions to those problems than somebody with a lot of degrees and a lot of research money. It doesn't mean that we want to get rid of degrees and research money, but the best illustration I can find here in Atlanta is a couple of young hoodlums that we organized when I was mayor, and they wanted to have a conference, but they didn't want anybody telling them what to do. So I arranged for them to have World Congress Center one Saturday. It wasn't nearly as big as it is now. And I gave them $500 to work with. And we couldn't have any adults speaking, but we could be observers. That group of young people, the leaders of that group are all millionaires now. They were young hoodlums in the 80s. They've been in and out of jails. But they developed the whole rap industry. And when somebody wanted to change the name of Bankhead, because that's the name of a Confederate general, they said, no, we don't know about any Confederate general. That's where the Bankhead Bounce came from, and that's the source of the dirty South in rap. And that's our cultural base. But that cultural base has now led to a homeless kid from New Orleans coming over here and helping to make some crazy movies that were embarrassing to many educated people. We sold him the Army base, Fort McPherson, at least half of it. And I went to the celebration of its opening a couple of weeks ago, and that Army base has generated $9 billion worth of economic activity, and there are 32,000 jobs. And not many folk there ever set foot in a college, especially not Tyler Perry. In fact, Tyler Perry said, when they asked him, where did you get the inspiration to come to Atlanta from New Orleans? And he said, I saw Freaknik. Well, any of you who were here for Freaknik realized that it was a great embarrassment to the city. See, because there was a whole lot of black college students acting the fool. But if Freaknik produced the culture that we now have coming out of Fort McPherson, that I don't even know the names of the movies, but 6 of the movies that they've made there have grossed over $1 billion. The only one I can remember and appreciate was Black Panther. But there's a whole mythology around Wakanda and a whole value system that's developing that has nothing to do with liberal arts education as we know it. it's an attempt to almost Africanize. But these young people have read more about African civilization than they have about American history. But we got a president that doesn't know much about American history, so that's probably not all bad. We still need people to understand American history, because it wouldn't have been possible for them to have even survived in this country if it had not been for those of us who came out of the civil rights movement, who really, as Martin Luther King said, developed a method to help America live out the true meaning of its creeds. And I'll stop there because I don't know anything about what the future may hold. But I have faith in the creativity and the drive and the social combustion of people of differing backgrounds and different cultures coming together and dealing with their problems. In my foundation, after everything else I've done, they said, did I have a bucket list? And so in trying to figure out my bucket list at 75, I ended up with an agenda which I think turned out to be amazingly relevant. But we found something called duckweed in Asia and Africa and in the United States that happens to be it's the highest source of vegetable protein that's got 48% protein, whereas the best we've done with all of the genetic modification and everything else with soy is 44%. And this is a natural 50% with all of the essential amino acids. So we're trying to, I don't know what we're trying to do. We're just trying to make sure. I think that was what Moses found and called it manna from heaven. Because if you can just cook it and make a soup, and you've got a enough nutrition to survive. The other thing is we've worked with aquaponics, where in a 1 acre farm, growing fish and vegetables in the same water, you can recycle the water, fertilize without any chemical fertilizer. The fish food and the fish waste give rise to the nutrition in the plants. And we sold that to the World Bank. I mean, we got them committed, and they've set aside $250 million for 8 countries. And we set up the first experiment in Ivory Coast, which is where Dean Wallace was provost for a few years back, and where there's been a connection between Atlanta and Ivory Coast through the International University of Grand-Bassam. And I think there are about 600 or so students from Grand-Bassam that have come here to get master's degrees and are ready to go back. And that looks like the base from which we will work with 8 other countries. Now, you don't have to do anything with Nigeria. If Nigeria sees it, I was with the president of Nigeria last Sunday, former president, and we were talking about all of the millionaires that we developed here in Atlanta through our affirmative action efforts and making capital available and job opportunities available. And he just mentioned very casually that, we counted up and we have 37 billionaires that we developed in Nigeria. One of them decided that he was going to put $1 billion into growing rice rather than importing rice. Well, I don't want him to grow rice. Rice is fat food, slave food. It makes you can work starches, but if I can get him to put a couple of $100 million into vegetables and fish, he doesn't need anybody's help. He's a good enough businessman. He's got enough money. He can make more money. In fact, the aquaponic operation that I saw in Korea that is on just about 1 hectare of land. That's about 2 acres. Not quite 2 acres, but 3 acres per hectare. But anyway, it's about 2 acres. And they were making $2 million a month on fish and vegetables. They employed 142 workers. Only about 10 or 15 of them were caring for the fish and the vegetables. The others were operating like Amazon, and they had certain clients. They were sitting around computers, and they were getting restaurants vegetable orders and fish orders for the day. And so people that were their customers were eating vegetables that were harvested the day before they were served. I ate like a pig over there, only to come home thinking that I'd gained weight, but that eating, day-old food or fresh vegetables and fish, and eating an exorbitant amount more than usual because it was good food, and then to come find out I'd lost 5 pounds. So that there are lots of answers. Now, I jumped that to medicine. My daddy wanted me to be a doctor, and one of the reasons I didn't want to be a doctor was doctors heal people after they're sick. And I always felt that most people were sick because their minds were bad or their spirits were not right, and that getting at health from a spiritual perspective was probably better than from a medical perspective. For me, that's been true. And that this city growing from less than 1 million to almost 7 million, and working out almost every project problem we've had, except traffic. And that was because we had an outer perimeter planned and had the land and had the money. And I'm going to tell it like it is. Some crazy ass black folk got mad about the Confederate flag. And they were fighting about the flag, and they lost the governor's race because the governor agreed with them and changed the flag. And he lost the race. The Republican that got in, first thing he did was get rid of sell all the land to his friends and wiped out the possibility of an outer perimeter. He also wouldn't build a Mercedes plant down near Savannah, and that was already signed, 3,000 jobs already there. But the counties around Savannah are 40 to 60% black. And instead, he put a Kia plant over on the east side of Georgia where the county is 10, 12% black. Now, I made a racist analysis of that. It may not be that way, but that's the way it looks to me. And if you're black and not slightly paranoid, you're really sick. But to wind up, I don't, well, I like that old spiritual. I don't feel no ways tired. We've come too far from where we started from. And nobody told us that the way would be easy. But I think the same spiritual presence and power that has got us this far will continue to lead us on. Thank you. Yep.
So you
Talked about what?
talked about reading some books,
Yeah.
right? And could you tell us a little bit about, you got a lot of different jobs, how you've been busy, how you've made time for whether it's reading books, any other self-care you have done in terms of time for yourself? Again, you've had a lot of busy jobs. What time do you make for yourself, and how do you use that time?
Well, I picked good jobs for one thing. And I didn't pick them, they picked me. But the civil rights movement, I mean, everybody else walked 50 miles from Selma to Montgomery. I probably walked 300, because I was back and forth from the front of the line and the back line, and and so I haven't had to organize exercise. I've stayed busy enough, and I was a swimmer in college, and so when I really get frustrated, the one place I can relax and sort of, swimming to me is sort of like meditation. And if I can get to a beach or get to a swimming pool and start swimming, all my troubles are gone after a while. I used to ride a bicycle till the traffic got too heavy. But you could get on a bicycle and ride around my neighborhood, which was about 7 miles loop, while my wife was fixing dinner. There were certain events that were like the bicycle ride across Georgia, where a couple of thousand people get together, and we start out on a Sunday, and we get to Savannah or one of the places down there by Saturday, and that's a nice way to take a friendly vacation. I think by integrating, by developing a lifestyle, but I always, especially now that I guess I got about 75 books in my iPad, because every time I see a book, like I saw the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and it doesn't take me any time to, well, I'm gonna tell the truth, I don't know how to order it, but I can give it to my secretary and say, order this book for me. And Amazon will send me a copy of it, but I always get a copy downloaded onto my iPad, so that I always have a library with me. The iPad is much better now because I'm 87 and I don't see as well, but I can make the print larger and I can scroll it, and it makes me an automatic speed reader, because instead of 12 or 15 words to a line, you enlarge the print and you got 8 or 10 words to a line, and you read a lot faster. And you got it in your pocket, so that if I'm waiting at the airport or on a plane, I always have a choice of books. I'm reading a book now that it's the biography of John Adams. And it's very helpful because all of the troubles and struggles that we got now, they had Washington and Adams and Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. He doesn't come off quite the triumphant person he does in the musical, but you see that these problems have been with us all along, and we have survived them and thrived over them. And if you think of problems, say like lifting weights, you increase the weights that you lift gradually because it makes you stronger. And the same is true of the problems you have. You have one level of problems. The worst problems I had when I was, say, 17 and 18. And when I got through that, from then on, you know, I guess I learned to solve problems in college by sleeping and relaxing. And I say, well, one of my mottos I get from Red Fox. Red Fox said he had a soap that wiped away all his troubles. And his soap was F-U-G-G. And his slogan was, if Lux won't do it, if Does won't do it, fug it. And, you know, you have to kind of keep a relaxed attitude. You're not the first one that ever lived. You're not going to be the last one. And others have had it a lot harder. And because of the anniversary of slavery, I've been trying to dig back and find out where my slave ancestors came from. What I'm finding instead also is that there are cures of diseases that were known in Africa that were part of the diet that we have not used here, and that we're now working with Morehouse Medical School on new methods of practicing medicine, and which deal more with nutrition and I forget even what they call it. They call it precision medicine, that 90% of the research done in medicine is done on people of European descent, and that there's been very little research done on people of African or Asian descent in the U.S., and that we're working with Morehouse Medical School now with a group who is, well, just a month ago, they had me spit in a test tube. And from a test tube full of spit, it's not as nasty as it sounds. And it's much less painful than somebody drawing blood. But they're working on my DNA. And they're going to give me a DNA profile of, you know, the things I need to worry about, so that we're trying to get Morehouse and Grady and also Atlanta Technical College. Atlanta Technical College is the best educational dollar you can spend here, because 98% of the people who go to school there come out with a job. And there's no other school in the city that can say that. And anybody can go there, and it doesn't matter whether you've been in jail, whether you've been a prostitute, or whether you're pregnant or got drug problems, they take you. And you leave with a job. Well, we're working with them to try to help them to set up a diagnostic department that would maybe train people, and I don't know what they have to do, but to read to read the genomic code of somebody's spit and tell you why you might be getting diabetes and what you can do to avoid it before it happens. And if we can revolutionize medicine that way from a predominantly black medical school, and partner with Nigeria, and if any one of these 37 billionaires decides that they want to reinvest in healthcare, we're opening up a whole new world, and I'm particularly interested. The only thing I've been afraid of in disease-wise is Alzheimer's and dementia and Parkinson's, and those are, to me, the most devastating diseases, because you're not in pain, but you're inflicting pain on people around you. And so my wife and I have had a number of friends who have gone through that. One of the reasons I got this scooter, though, is because I had 4 funerals about 25 years ago, and all 4 of them were friends of mine, brilliant intellectuals. I think 2 of them had PhDs, and one a CFA, international CFA, the other was MD, and yet they, I don't know, something happened to them after knee surgery or hip surgery or some kind of bone surgery, that they all lapsed into Alzheimer's and dementia. And these wonderful gentlemen and intellectuals suddenly got mean and ignorant and their wives had to have them institutionalized. And so I didn't have knee replacements, but I can get around on my little scooter. And that was a couple of $1,000, and knee replacements about $60,000. So just, listen to your body, listen to your mind, listen to your spirit, and you can be led through many of the dangers and complexities of life. And as you live through them, you will help others around you. And you can also market it and make money.
Really
Okay.
appreciate your time.